Hi, Deb.
Hi. How are you?
Good, good. Thank you.
Mm.
So we're going to talk about the polyvagal theory in therapy, and that's something that a lot of people do, but you actually do it in a much more systematic way and make it a central part of what you do.
Yes.
So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yes. So I do. I make polyvagal theory the foundation for my work with clients. So every client that I work with understands their nervous system and understands their autonomic map. And we then speak the language of polyvagal theory in our sessions, because what it does is it brings into explicit awareness what is happening in the background all the time. And I know that many therapists and many models use the nervous system, use the concepts of polyvagal theory, but not in an explicit way, in the way that I've created. So those three organizing principles that are always at work, neuroception, hierarchy, and regulation, once we bring them into awareness and map them and can track them, then we can use them. So we can engage the nervous system as a partner in the work we're doing.
Yeah. So it's not just a question of at some point showing a chart or so talking about the nervous system, but you're talking about finding an experiential understanding that takes time to build and showing different aspects of this polyvagal theory in terms of how it applies to clients understanding their nervous system and having a personal experiential acquaintance with it.
Exactly. So that clients begin to look at the world through the lens of their nervous system, which starts with therapists understanding their nervous system. So polyvagal theory to me is something you learn from the inside out rather than from the top down. So you do have to understand the concepts, but you embody them and you learn what it means for your nervous system to take in cues of safety and danger and to move from ventral to sympathetic to dorsal and back again. And you learn in an embodied nervous system to nervous system way what it's like to be in co-regulation with another person. So that's, yeah, go ahead.
So when you're talking about embodied oak, so that's where we talk about neuroception. Yes. That this is not an intellectual understanding of how the system works, but experiencing how people experience this.
Right. Because neuroception is working in the background all the time, and we feel the outcome of neuroception. So when neuroception takes in cues of danger, it then does something in our nervous system, and we feel the outcome of that. And then my work is to help people bring perception to neuroception so that we can then begin to track it and be curious about it. Cues of safety are the same. We want to bring in more cues of safety. In order to do that, we have to find out, what does your neuroception experience as a cue of safety, which may be very different from what my neuroception experiences as a cue of safety. So we're always bringing curiosity to this subcortical process that's going on.
So, and curiosity is based on learning to navigate the territory. And so that mixture of paying attention to neuroception, but also being able to map it in terms of perception, in terms of language. And you have developed actually a series of tools in order to do that in a systematic way.
Right. So, when I first tried to think, how could we bring polyvagal into everyday clinical practice, I came up with a map, because we humans do like maps. They help us orient and help us know where we are and figure out where we want to go. So I created a ladder map, and the ladder maps your three states of the nervous system. And once we've done that, we do that, very early in work, in clinical work, second or third session, we begin mapping. We begin understanding the nervous system. And so when you understand, what's it like for you to be in ventral vagal? what happens in your body, what are some of your thoughts, what are your behaviors, excuse me, what are your beliefs, and then the same in sympathetic and in dorsal. Then the question becomes, the clinical question becomes, where are you on your map right now?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Because if you're in ventral, then we have, or even have a toehold in ventral is really all we need. Then we have some curiosity on board. We have enough safety and connection and regulation that we can work with the traumatic experiences, or we can work with the distress and the suffering, because we can be with it, not be hijacked by it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But when we leave ventral, when our system gets so challenged that our vagal brake cannot hold us in ventral any longer, and we enter the realm of sympathetic mobilization, of fight and flight, then we no longer have access to curiosity and to seeing options. We're stuck in a story.
Yeah.
And that story comes out of the properties of a sympathetic nervous system mobilization.
But again, here, what it is that you're doing is, it's not just the therapist's responsibility to say, okay, so work is going to happen if the client is in the ventral. But from the very beginning of the therapy, the client is enlisted in having that curiosity about seeing how they fit in the map, and in separating the story from the state.
Exactly. That's beautiful. I'm glad you brought that up, because the story is made, the brain makes the story in order to make some sense of what state the body is in. And so, when I'm working with clients, our first question is, what state are you and where are you on the map? Because your story is going to come out of that state. Mm-hmm. And yes, I want my clients to be, active participants in this problem. This is in this process. It's not me, trying to decide where they are. It's really engaging them in their own mapping and tracking process, and they become students of their own system. And this work is not just done in the therapy session. It is outside the therapy session that they get to kind of follow, where's my nervous system taking me right now? And what is going to happen. And then as we move along, we create resources to shape the system, because that's the beauty of the nervous system, and the beauty of polyvagal theory is knowing that experience shapes the nervous system. And when our clients are sitting in front of us, they bring a nervous system that's been shaped by many years of experience. And the hopefulness of polyvagal is they can be reshaped by ongoing experience. So,
right.
Yeah. So that's, and reshaped by autonomic exercises, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. So that the therapy, the talking about the states is not just a means to an end for the therapy, but is actually a reshaping of
Right.
the way clients understand themselves and experience life.
Yes. Because we all move down and up the hierarchy all the time, and the goal is not to be in ventral vagal regulation all the time. That's not the goal. The goal is to have flexibility in moving down through sympathetic dorsal and back through sympathetic to ventral, because a rigid nervous system, a nervous system that responds with rigid patterns, is one that brings suffering and illness, whether it's physical illness. So it's really about befriending all of your states and learning how to be flexible in coming back to ventral. Right.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, not rigid, but that sense of flexibility. But yeah, you're talking about the ladder, and I want to invite you to talk a little bit more about it, because visually, many people, the model is the sense of window of tolerance, right. And so visually, they might follow that as the mindfulness being in the middle. I want maybe talk a little bit more about your.
Yes, and I too was trained window of tolerance. I'm a sensory motor psychotherapist trained, and so window of tolerance. And then when I discovered Steve's work and polyvagal, it just made sense to me that because it's a hierarchy, we're going to put it on a ladder to really respect the way that the system was built. So at the bottom of the ladder is the first nervous system state that came into being, dorsal vagal. And even, you think about it, I have a little mannequin that's crumpled up at the bottom of the ladder, still on the ladder, because we're never off the ladder. Our nervous system is always holding us in some state. So he's got one hand on the ladder, but he's looking way up at the top to see, oh, I need to get up there. So there's that sense of despair and hopelessness and disconnection at the bottom. And then in the middle of the ladder, I have a little guy who's in that fight-flight place. And, we're moving up. We've come out of immobilization to the next system, which mobilizes. So I have a survival response that allows me to mobilize here. But my view is very narrow, because in the middle of the ladder, I can only see this far. Mm-hmm. And then if we go to the top of the ladder, I have a guy who's standing at the top of the ladder, joyfully, arms raised, and the image is, you can see everything, and you have options, and there's possibility, and you can see forever, at the top of the ladder. And that's the state, as we're in ventral at the top of the ladder, our sympathetic and dorsal systems are regulated, and they're doing their non-reactive roles to help keep us alive, and all is well, and then you get this sense of, I have clients who talk about, was it a day when they were nimble on their ladder, right? Mm-hmm. Or was it a day when they felt like they were falling off or stuck? So it's an interesting way to think about navigating. So you move down the rungs and up the rungs.
Yeah. And it's also the evolutionary ladder.
It is the evolutionary ladder.
The stages of evolution.
Which is really what I wanted to honor with Steve's hierarchical theory, So, and I think for clients, it's really helped, because they understand that when they're in immobilization in dorsal, they don't just come back to ventral. They have to have a mobilizing moment. So they move through that place in the ladder back to ventral, mm-hmm. and vice versa. So it's hard to make the switch, and I have lots of clinicians who have come to my trainings who are window of tolerance trained, and by the end of our training they make the switch, and then they go, oh, now that makes sense, and it's a great image for clients. So there's actually 3 maps in the sequence so they can track their states, their triggers, what I call glimmers, which are those moments when you're in ventral that are just micro moments but are so important to recognize. And then resources, to move out of dorsal or sympathetic and to stay in ventral. So it becomes...
Let's talk a little bit more about this, because what makes this systematic and practical is that you don't just identify the stages in the ladder, but there is a sense of also paying attention to internal states and paying attention to what triggers a certain state, or the glimmers in the case of ventral vagal, but also how you stay there in the good things and how you get out of it for the bad things. So that's a whole system of how to navigate the states.
Right. And in in the triggers and glimmers map, the second one, we get really concrete about what specifically triggers you into sympathetic or dorsal, and what specifically is a glimmer that we can replicate to help you, have that moment of ventral. And those triggers and glimmers become targets for therapy, right? And then in the third map, the regulating resources map, we really pay attention to both self-regulating resources and co-regulating resources. And I think we forget that often in therapy. Our world is about, becoming independent and self-regulating, and yet the nervous system depends on co-regulation. And for many of our clients, those co-regulating opportunities have been missing. And so we really want to bring those into the therapy process and identify that, yes, you need both co-regulating and self-regulating resources. So yes, there's a sequence that happens, and then people begin to really understand and get out of the story and get out of shame and blame, because they know, oh, it's my nervous system enacting a survival response, because neuroception has felt a cue of danger. And neuroception works both noticing what's happening inside my body and what's happening in the environment. Right at the moment, it's noticing that I have a cough from a cold. So it's a bit of a cue of danger and a little anxiety around this process that we're in right now, right?
Yeah.
I feel a little bit of nervous system mobilization, and then I can look at you and I can name that out loud. And as I name it, my system begins to quiet a bit because I've explicitly said, here's what's going on.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
And so
that's a case of the neuroception that can be married to the story, or can be, actually, we can have the perspective to notice that it doesn't have to be that story, and then go a different way with it.
Exactly. Yeah, because it's checking inside, and it's in the environment, and it's checking between my nervous system and yours. Mm-hmm. Those are the three places. Neuroception works: inside, outside, and between. And it's always looking in those three places for cues of safety and danger.
Yeah. And again, where many therapists would describe their work this way, what you're showing is actually making this a systematic part of the work. Yeah. That the client is enlisted.
Yes.
In this.
Right. We're in a partnership. Which I know therapeutic relationships, we talk about partnership, but this is we are doing this together, and we are going to map your system, and I'm going to know where my system is, and we're going to use that information as we move through every moment of this therapy. And the guiding question, there are two. One guiding question is for the therapist: where is my nervous system at the moment, and what does it need? And then, where's my client's nervous system at the moment, and what does it need? And we have to be able to answer those questions. I want my client to be able to, very easily answer that question. Where are you on your autonomic map? Mm-hmm. And what is needed in this moment for your nervous system to feel safe and connected, right? And then you can see how this is great to apply with couples and in families, because you have a different language you're speaking. Rather than saying, you always do this, you always walk away, you never listen to me. I can look at you and say, wow, I think that's a nervous system that's feeling some sympathetic mobilization and a need to leave right now, right? Which is a very different experience, very different story, right? It's not that you don't want to be here, it's that your biology is saying, I can't safely be here right now. Right? And so then I can either just say, okay, you'll come back when you're ready, or I can say, anything I can do, right? But it's a very different experience.
Yeah, because the story is related to the person, as if the person were omnipotent. And this is about relating the person to the circumstances they're in, and to the natural processes that we have evolved to deal with threat.
Exactly. And, my system, even though I had a sympathetic mobilization just a bit ago, my system is more tuned towards a dorsal vagal disconnect out of my history. That's sort of my autonomic profile. Yours might be sympathetic or dorsal, I don't know, but we have these sort of tendencies we lean towards. And, if my partner can understand that I'm more apt to go to dorsal than sympathetic, then, it adds information. Mm-hmm. That is helpful for our relationship, right?
Yeah.
Story. It's the autonomic story rather than the cognitive story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so, how do you introduce that to people?
Introduce the theory to people?
Yeah, when clients come, mm-hmm. and just generally, clients are eager to tell their story and live the thing through their story. Yeah. And so, how do you make the shift from, on the one hand, being sympathetic, empathetic, but also creating a different focus?
So interesting, because you're right. Clients love they come in and they have a story that they're suffering with, and they want to tell it. And if I have a client who comes in and wants to tell their story, then I'm going to get out a map. And as they're telling the story, I'm going to say, okay, so I'm just going to see if I can put your story on this map of your nervous system as we go along. So talk to me a little bit. And then they'll tell me a piece, and I go, oh, that sounds like the part of your nervous system that has a lot of mobilizing energy. And for me, that sounds like there's a fight response going on. Is that right? And they may say yes, or they may say no, it's more flight. And they'll say, okay, so we're going to put that part of the story here in the middle of the ladder. And so as they're talking, we begin to put the story on the ladder. And when they get to the end of the story, we say, so here's the story, just so we can look at it in a different way. And as we look at it through this ladder map, we're going to feel it in your body. And we're going to hear the story, not through the words that you just told me, but through your body systems. And most clients are very fascinated by that because it makes sense to them. Right? It makes sense. It's like, oh, yes, that's what was happening. And because you were in the sympathetic flight, you know, your brain was not online, and here's what was happening in your body. And tell me a little bit what your thoughts were. And then we begin to get the thoughts that go along with that state. So it's sort of a reverse engineering way of creating the map. For other clients who come in, we'll say, what do you want to work on? And they'll tell me, and they won't have a story that they're ready to tell yet, which is the other thing. Many of our trauma clients aren't ready to tell a story yet. And so I say, so let's get to know your nervous system and create a language and safety for you and me to be together and talk about, so that when you're ready to tell your story, we'll be able to track it through this map. So either way works. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
And so, so you have maybe some vignette or something that you might use to show how this takes place.
Sure. Let me think about a good one. That's a powerful one. It's interesting to see in a parent and child. We'll take that example because it's always interesting to work with parents and kids in the session, right? And a child who was just really having their own version of a sympathetic storm, right? And we had done the mapping with both parent and child. And so, as the child was dysregulating into this sympathetic survival response, I was helping mom stay in her ventral vagal, which was very hard for her because she was looking at her child and all of her own story was coming up. And she was, her first response was to go to a sympathetic fight place of her own and a critical and a don't do that. And that sort of blaming, shaming behavior.
So let me just slow it down a little bit. So I want just maybe invite you to capture the feeling of in the room. So there's you, there's the parent, there's the child, and obviously the child is going through sympathetic, so there's some activation there. There's some activation for the mother. You're somewhere in the middle, probably also somewhat activated, and dealing with the two activations. So what's it like?
So yeah, and I like what you just said, because it's a reminder as a therapist, and I think as a couples therapist or a family therapist, because you have more than one nervous system you're connecting. It becomes more complicated, right? You've got to regulate lots of nervous systems. And so in this particular instance, as in all of them, I have to be firmly anchored in my ventral vagal in order to provide that energy for both mom and child, right? But my job is to firmly anchor in ventral so that I can then extend that to mom and help her come back to her ventral. Which one of the easy ways that I always teach all of my clients is around breath work, because breathing is the most direct route to changing the nervous system. So sighing is a simple way to bring a bit of regulation back, and most people, when they're having a difficult time, sighing is not hard to do, right? So, I looked at mom and I said, come on, sigh with me, right? And so we did which hers was a sigh of frustration. And I said, so one more sigh, and then it became more of a sigh of oh, okay, sighing into it. And then I said, where are you on your map now? And she said, I'm coming back to ventral, right? See, there's the beauty of the map, because she can tell me exactly what's happening. And I said, okay, so I moved over close to her. I said, I'm just going to sit right here next to you so that you can feel my ventral connecting with yours. And now let's turn our attention to your child. And what do you see now? And she could look over there and she said, wow, he's really suffering. He's in a survival response right now, isn't he? And I said, yes, he is. And what his nervous system need. And from there, she was able to go sit next to him, and she was able to offer what they had already played around with that would be helpful when he's in this sympathetic storm. So, and it happens pretty quickly once you get, whether it's the mom of a child, or whether it's one person in a couple. When you get one person back to ventral, the whole room changes. You can feel it in the room, because then that system is looking at the other through the eyes of passion and curiosity, rather than through a blaming story. Right? So all of a sudden, her child was no longer, being bad and doing it on purpose and making her life hard. Her child was suffering and dysregulated and needed some co-regulation.
Yeah. And so that breaks the loop. If we think about the dynamics as a form of loop, just one person getting into ventral breaks that loop.
Yes. Yeah, I always tell the clinicians who come to my trainings that there has to be at least one ventral vagal system in the room, and as the therapist, it had better be yours, right? Because then we can help our clients, or one partner or a parent, find their own ventral. That's the place where magic happens, when we're in ventral, right? Yeah.
So that might be a good place to end, but I just want to check if you have something else you would want to add.
That felt like a nice place to end, the magic of ventral, and I guess I would just encourage everybody who's listening to experiment with their own system, that it really is up to us as clinicians, but also as parents and partners and as colleagues and friends, really to take on the responsibility to be regulated and to be able to regulate with others.
Yeah. Thanks, Deb.
It's been lovely. Thank you.